Boundaries. How the heck do boundaries have a thing to do with spirituality, right? Hopefully I can explore that with you today. And I want to start with a story. So once upon a time, there were two boys who lived on a quiet island. They lived near the island's lighthouse where the land stretched high above the sea to form these great cliffs of black rock. And they loved nothing more than to play in the spacious patch of grass that reached from their garden to the edge of the cliff. And they would spend all evening playing there until the last light was swallowed by the sea. But they had to play cautiously because of the stark and dangerous cliff. And over the years, they had kind of grown accustomed to the piece of land, so they had kind of formed a mental boundary at about 10 paces away from the cliff's edge, where they knew rough and speedy play was not allowed. And one day, a carpenter came up to see the boys. He had been working on the lighthouse, and he followed the cliffside path up to where they were, and as he passed the boys' patch of land, he stopped and he watched them play. He watched them play for a while before they rushed over to greet him. The carpenter said, "You boys could really stretch your legs and make use of this land even more. If there was a fence along the edge, I could build you one," he said. And the oldest boy said, "No doubt you could, and it'd probably be a good fence too, but the trouble with fences is that they tend to keep out visitors like yourself." "Yeah, we wouldn't want to miss out on travelers' stories," said the younger boy. The carpenter didn't persist. He just simply bid the boys farewell. And a few weeks later, the boys came to the patch of grass to play, and they discovered that there had been a fence erected. It was a great solid fence that ran along the cliff's edge and created a secure perimeter around the field. "That carpenter went and did it," said the boys. And after some moping and cursing, the boys fetched their ball and just began to play anyway. And at first, the play was the usual cautious and within the confines of their mental boundary that kept them from nearing the edge. But gradually, the boys began to run more fiercely and freely, throwing and chasing the ball with more fervor and gusto than ever before. Creativity and spontaneity sprang up naturally in their play, and they lost time and space in their mindset, fully immersed in the experience of playing without worrying about the edge. They quickly adjusted to the fence and to the absence of danger, and were able to finally play to their fullest capacity. And one day their flow of the game was interrupted by another traveler walking in their field. "Well, hello, traveler, welcome," said the eldest. "But how, sir, did you get over that great big fence?" "He said through the gate, installed on the path," replied the traveler, and they all enjoyed a game together. The end. Think about that for a second. Boundaries are a necessary part of living, because boundaries, especially those with gates that welcome others when we open them, they help us live authentically and freely with, as the story says, confidence and gusto, because we aren't constantly worrying about the sharp edges of life. Boundaries are the invisible lines that we draw between ourselves and others, everyone else in our lives. Over here, on this side of the boundary, this is my business. This is my life, my responsibility, my authenticity, my emotions, my self-esteem, my journey to wholeness. That's over here. And over there, on the other side of the boundary, is your business, your life, your responsibility, your emotions, your reactions, your stuff, right? And this boundary is my responsibility to place, to maintain, and it can move and change, but that's up to me to decide, right? The bottom line, we talked about this in Sacred Cup this morning, the bottom line is we are here to love ourselves. That is our basic job. And man, that's a lifelong puzzle, right? To know who we are spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally. That's our job, is to figure out who we are and who we are not. Where we stop and where others begin. Where we can run freely and where our emotional cliffs are, so to speak. We spend our lives understanding with more and more specificity over time and experience exactly who we are and what it takes to allow us to run our most joyful energy, the most love energy, the most vitality in our lives. That's what we spend our lives figuring out. Our only assignment in life is to love ourselves enough so that we can love everyone else too. If we aren't loving ourselves, quite frankly, we cannot truly love anyone else. If we don't have good self-esteem or self-love, extending love to other people is almost impossible. See, I believe and I teach that the secret to spirituality, to creating and attracting the best life that we want and desire, is all about self-esteem. When we feel better about ourselves, our life just gets better and better and better all around us, because it is our thoughts that attract and create the things that we want in our lives. That's basic science mind, right? Nathaniel Branden wrote this book called 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem, and he wrote this: people with high self-esteem have strong personal boundaries, and practicing strong personal boundaries is one way to build self-esteem. It's kind of a circle. So who are you? That's the first question. When you get quiet, when you get really quiet in prayer and meditation, out in nature, being alone, having that reset day that Michael Gott wrote about, you discover your connection with your highest self, with God. That sense of love and peace and tranquility that you feel, that is who you really are. That vibration of ease comes to life within you when you are aligned and whole. And we are loving ourselves the most when we live in that sensation that I just described, that sensation of peacefulness and tranquility. When we live our best lives, we spend as much time as possible in that vibration, as much as possible. I want you to think of your energy pool or energy field like a swimming pool, okay? Think about that. When you're alone in a pool, the water is tranquil and still as you can possibly make it, right? Your emotions and reactions and anxieties and fears are what trouble your inner waters, right? So imagine right now, what would your swimming pool inside you look like if it reflected your emotional state? Would it be like smooth like glass? Or would it be all tumultuous? Or would it be somewhere kind of in between, right? When we moved into our house, we have a swimming pool. And you know, by law, when you move into a house, or when you have a house, you have to have a barrier around your pool. And so when we moved in, there was a barrier around it, so children, couldn't accidentally trip and fall into the pool. Now, we don't have very many kids around our house, so we took ours up and rolled it up and put those little plastic caps all in those little holes. But the people next door, they have children, 3 of them under the age of 6. Don't ask me about that. But in that house, their security fence around their pool is in place every single day, as you can imagine. And some people go another step. They put an alarm on their pool so that they can be in the house doing whatever and not worried about their pool, because if anything breaks the surface of that water, they will be alarmed. They will know. It makes sense, doesn't it, right? So that safety barrier or that alarm allows life to go on comfortably and with ease. Why? Because everyone knows that a boundary is in place. It's just like the fence by the cliff for the boys in the story. Everyone can play or live more authentically knowing where the edges are, and they will know if that boundary gets violated. So I think when we zipped into our magic suits to become human beings, our energy field came with a safety barrier. And trust me, if you're around a baby, a child's alarm system will go off if that energy field is violated in a way that they do not like. Its instinct is to recoil or cry or push away from those things that do not feel right to them. Am I right? So how's your alarm system going? So when we were young, we are able to sense when people are good for us or not, don't we? We can feel it. We can feel when someone's motives are just not quite right. But so often, what is happening in our domestication process that Don Miguel Ruiz talks about is we are trained to ignore. We are trained to ignore our intuition and our instincts so that we are nice and polite. Can I get an amen? That's what we're taught, right? People insist that we go places we do not want to go and do things we do not want to do. We spend time and effort doing tasks and learning things that we do not want to do and learn. I've even seen parents insist that their kids major in something in college and go into careers that the kid has no interest in whatsoever. And if you had these kinds of experiences with your alarm system just kind of being violated or ignored, what happens is you have a hard time figuring out what you really want and what you really like, right? And if choices are constantly made for you, and then in the twisty way, the consequences of that choice are also blamed on you, then, or better yet, swept away by the decision makers. There are no consequences, right? It can be quite confusing. You can lose your voice in that process. You can lose your ability to make solid, life-affirming choices that are good for you. And the overall result is that you develop what? People-pleasing tendencies or perfectionism. Maybe you can relate. It's hard to develop the ability to say yes and no if you seldom have the opportunity to speak a yes or a no along the way. And you go back to that swimming pool analogy. If your safety barrier was destroyed by others constantly ignoring your signals and when things weren't okay for you, if no one respected your space or your emotions or your mind or your body, basically others were jumping in your pool constantly and creating lots of waves and disturbances and splashes. Most people in that situation take one extreme or the other. One extreme is just allowing the chaotic energy field to continue unchecked because getting everyone out of your energy field, out of your swimming pool, seems like a foreign concept altogether, and there's no self-confidence built up to do anything to change it. That's one extreme. The other extreme is that you kick everyone out and withdraw into yourself and refuse to let anyone get close to you just to keep yourself safe. We talked in Sacred Cup about big old elaborate walls we've built so that nobody gets in, nobody has access. And I found that there's something in between those two extremes. First of all, you got to release the shame that your pool's a mess, right? It's like it is what it is, but how do I get these people and these things out of my pool? You turn to spirit. You turn to your spiritual strength to start developing boundaries so that you can be authentic and peaceful. And sometimes you lose a friend. Sometimes you lose a friend in that process. Authenticity means that you're feeling the emotions you are feeling with openness and safety. It means that you're listening to your own moods and to the calling of your soul, what you need. It means that you can be yourself and love yourself just the way you are. Remember what I said, your number one job is to figure out how to love yourself. Not the self that other people think you should be, but your real self, the self that you are right here, right now. Let me say it again. The most important thing is that you love yourself. That is your one important job as a human being. Love yourself. Know yourself. Honor yourself. Allow yourself to be. And if I start there, and I know what it feels like to love myself, then I can know when my boundaries are too weak or too rigid. So I want to define what a boundary is. You read it this morning, Prentice Hemphill. The definition I love the most is when I found it, I was reading Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart, which is a fabulous book about figuring out who you are emotionally. And Prentice Hemphill wrote in that book, a boundary is the distance required at which I can love you and me simultaneously. But I love this definition because it acknowledges the primary task is to love yourself the most, love myself. And the secondary task is, in the spirit of oneness, to love everyone else. I have to love everybody, but if I can't take care of myself, I can't love everybody else. So if I'm loving myself, My swimming pool is peaceful and quiet. And when you come close enough and your energy or your attitude or your opinion of me disturbs my pool, you have to move away. You have to get outside of my safety barrier because your energy is disturbing my tranquil pool inside myself, right? Because you see, there are some people, there are actually a lot of people, who can slip into my pool or even jump in my pool, and I am happier in their presence, right? My joy goes up. I feel more confident about myself. I love myself even more when they're around. My pool is a heck of a lot more fun when some people are there, right? I can pull them close and I know I don't lose an ounce of who I am. My boundary distance with them, by this definition, can be pretty minuscule. I don't need you to go very far, right? These are the people that you identify and you pull closer. You spend more time with them. You invite them more fully into your world. Why? Because with that person, love is flowing. Authenticity is growing. That is a great relationship. But there are other people, when their presence is disruptive, what does that feel like? When they are around, I question myself. I doubt my choices. Their energy is disquieting to my soul. Sometimes these people are people in the world that the world says, I gotta love them if I'm a good person. Sometimes these people are people who I supposedly have an obligation to be in relationship with. Sometimes these are people who I must work with every day or see on a regular basis due to some human level choice that I've made. They kind of come with the package. Most of the time, these people, if they're still sticking around, they feel like they have some power in my life, and perhaps at some point I agreed they did, but I can somehow make a new choice today. If a boundary is the distance necessary so that I can love myself and you at the same time, my primary job is to love myself, these people have to back up. They have to move back outside whatever boundary I feel I need so that I can return to that tranquil pool of self-love, period. Boundaries create a pool where my authentic self can reside freely. So how do I do this, Laine? How do I do it? The first step is you've got to be aware that a new boundary is needed, right? And you know it because you've paid attention to the kind of quality of your inner pool of water, right? Most of the time, an inner alarm has already gone off around a person that you need a better boundary with. You may have ignored it, but that feeling you get in your stomach when you realize you have to spend time with them, that's a clue. That's a clue. The lies or excuses that you're already fabricating in your mind, knowing that you don't want to do something more with that person, that's a clue. Those are the signs that a new boundary is needed. Someone needs to back up, or their role in your life has got to diminish in some way. And the first step is also about understanding why boundaries are necessary. When we live without boundaries, we're telling the world that nothing in our life is sacred. The definition of sacred being set aside for a certain purpose. Set aside for a certain purpose. What parts of your life have you set aside for a sacred purpose? Because when we're in this first step, realizing we need new boundaries, you got to ask questions like, what is my energy here for? What is my time for? What are my emotions spent on? My resource, my life effort? Those are sacred to me, and I get to decide what I do with them. That's the first step. And the second step is to really figure out what you need to feel whole in the relationship with any person. What do you need? Remember, loving yourself is your most important job. So if this is like a coworker or someone that I can't really get out of my life, how do I renegotiate? Maybe I need to be transferred away from this coworker. Maybe I need to change my task a little bit or have them do a different role or whatever. Negotiate. Do I need to apply for a different job, right? What can I do to minimize this invasion of my energy field? And a second step is a little bit trickier when the person who's causing the disruption is a family member or someone society deems you must have a relationship with. Just don't forget that a boundary is not necessarily an end to that connection. This is a common thing I talk about with a lot of you, right? How do I get away from this person or this thing? It's simply changing the distance between the two of you so you can love them and love you. I'm not suggesting you don't love that other person. If I can't be authentically myself in the presence of this person in my family, it's about them, not about me. Take that in. It's not about you, it's about the other person. And maybe there will be fewer in-person visits, maybe none. Maybe there will be occasional phone calls. Maybe holidays are spent with my chosen family. Maybe I go, but I leave whenever my inner alarm goes off. Maybe I bring my own food so that my nutritional, loving self happens, whether it's provided for me or not. You just have to figure this out in your second step. What do you need? Because the second step requires some deep inner work. It's hard to figure out how to love yourself and hard to figure out what you need when you're just getting started in this task. Determining what the new boundary needs to look like can take some time, but it's worth it. And the third step is about implementing that new boundary, building the fence near the cliff, so to speak. Sometimes you can simply change the dance you're doing and they aren't paying attention and it doesn't really matter. They don't seem to notice that you've moved away. But other times the tiniest move you make is alarming to them, right? Especially to those who've been controlling the entire situation. Love yourself enough to get help in communicating if that is what is needed. And if you feel safer just withdrawing quickly without comment, remember that your life belongs to you. Your life is sacred for you. Boundaries are not about building walls around yourself that are impenetrable. Remember the gate? Remember the gate. Boundaries are also about building clear pathways for the best relationships possible. They are about building bridges with people who reflect your highest and best self and limiting time and space with those who don't. See, communicating and clarifying your boundaries allows others to be in relationship with you without tripping over any landmines, right? And when you look at it carefully, making sure others don't set off your landmines is a loving thing to do. It helps others know exactly what is okay with you and what is not. See, we teach each other how to be with us. How will others know how to treat us if we don't teach them how to do that? See, no one knows where your cliffs are. No one knows what your personal edges are. Building a clear boundary and communicating that with anyone you share your life with actually is the most loving thing you can do. And if your inner alarms are going off, pay attention to them. Pay attention to those alarms. Shift your relationships by having heart-to-heart conversations, letting people know when they've crossed a boundary so you don't build up resentment and damage your own self-esteem. Because guess what? Resentment damages you. Living in authenticity is a spiritual practice, and we can start right now where we are today. Forgive ourselves and others for being imperfect, and take whatever steps are necessary to live openly and freely in our tranquil, emotional swimming pool. Love yourself the most. It's your spiritual job. And we're going to close with our affirmation of the day. I live in authentic and loving relationships where my boundaries are clear.